And we had a lot of young children in our street. So it would be like 8 yards full of bicycles. I said, "Oh, I'm not go to the house." And then go to the next house.
Very nice if you like this. Ours got some way, it was like 7 years, we don't have 5, so 7 years we have 9. I mean, on my street.
Recording in progress.
Good evening. This is the November 1st meeting of the City of Charleston Board of Zoning Appeals and Zoning. Present are Allison Graz, Robin Richards, Bill Goodwin Jr., Chappie McKay, myself, John Bennett, your chair. From the planning staff are Lee Batchelder, Penny Ashby, and Omar Muhammad. These proceedings are being recorded, and we ask that you please speak. Identify yourself for the record, those that speak. We will conduct the meeting in the usual fashion. We will first receive information from city staff about the application and their recommendations. If the recommendation is favorable and no one objects to the application, usually the Board of Zoning Appeals treats the matter as being uncontested and passes it as a matter of course. If, however, the city recommends against the application and there's opposition to the application, we treat the application as contested and hear from the applicant and anyone else who is in favor of the application. Next, we will hear from anyone opposed, followed by a short rebuttal from the applicant. We then close the public portion of the meeting for that particular application and open discussion for Board of Zoning Appeals members only. We will then make a decision to approve with conditions, or deny the application. The Board of Zoning Appeals Zoning has the authority to do 3 things: hear appeals to decisions of the zoning administrator, grant special exceptions, the fact-finding function of the board, and grant variances to the zoning ordinance if the application meets the hardship test outlined in section 54-924 of the ordinance. The board may deliberate and make a final decision on a matter by a majority vote of members present at the hearing and qualified to vote, provided that not less than a quorum is present and qualified to vote. However, an affirmative vote of 2/3 of the board members present and voting shall be required before a use variance may be granted. For a variance to be granted, the Board of Zoning Appeals must make the following findings. First, that there are extraordinary and exceptional circumstances pertaining to the particular piece of property. The conditions do not generally apply to other properties in the vicinity, and because of these conditions, the application of the ordinance to the particular piece of property would effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property. And finally, the authorization of a variance will not be a substantial detriment to adjacent property or to the public good, and the character of the district will not be harmed by the granting of the variance. I believe all the items on the agenda will be heard tonight. There are no deferrals. For those who wish to speak this evening, we're going to go ahead and swear everyone in. If you're speaking, please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I solemnly swear to tell the whole truth, the truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you. I apologize, because sometimes we do that as simply as I do. The first item is item A1, review of the minutes and deferred applications for the previous BZA meeting on October 18th. Have all the board members received a copy of those minutes? Are there any motions?
Move for approval.
There is a move for approval by Ms. Grass. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Richards.
I have to abstain because I missed the last.
Thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? None. The motion is unanimously approved for the minutes of the previous meeting. The next item on the agenda, item A2, 438 King Street, Zeke Ragborough, request special exception under section 54-220 to allow a 36-unit accommodations use in a general business accommodations zone district. Mr. Batchelder.
So this is a hotel proposal on King Street, and this has been on the agenda starting this summer and was deferred because of some questions and concerns that came up. And so now we think that they've addressed all those issues and are prepared to move forward. So I'll just tell you right off the bat, I'm going to be recommending approval. I think they've met the requirements of the special exception test for the hotel, and I'll explain a little bit more in detail, but this is a fact-finding function of the board, being a special exception. So the ordinance lays out all the criteria that an application is supposed to satisfy, and you're supposed to make that determination ultimately. And I think they've met all those requirements. And let me just start off with a description of the site. This is the site plan showing the location of the property, fronting on King Street, but also touching John Street, where it has a narrow piece of the lot that extends out to John. And then the zoning map is shown here, and in the middle, highlighted in blue, is the property. And you see the red color that indicates the general business zoning in this case, for the most part. All these properties, except for a few on the left side, are zoned general business in that red shading. And then we've got some mixed-use workforce housing zoning classifications along King Street. Those are commercial zoning classifications. And then you see the brown shades that represent the residential zoning. And just on this block, I could get my cursor and let's see. I'm going to turn on my laser pointer. So now you see in the block that this property is located in, you've got the Children's Museum, the bus shed, the visitors center, and the parking lot, surface parking lot along Meeting Street over here. So the bulk of this block is actually owned by the city of Charleston as part of that complex of historic buildings. And then you've got the buildings along King Street, various commercial buildings along King Street. You've got the Charleston Music Hall on John Street. In the middle of that block, you've got a parking garage that's accessed off John Street. And then you've got the other buildings on King Street that are commercial buildings as well, and the Hampton Inn Hotel over here. So pretty intensively used area of the city right here. And this aerial photograph illustrates those properties and the buildings that occupy those properties. Front of this building is shown here in this photograph. It's a 3-story building and very prominent building in this part of King Street. And then the application and all the materials were included in the image overview that was placed on our website last week. They've addressed in this part of their application all of the requirements of the special exception test, and I'll come back and go through those. And then moving on, this is a map that I inserted into the presentation because it illustrates the other properties in the vicinity of this property that have hotel accommodations uses on them. And I've indicated with numbers the room counts for the nearby accommodations properties. But before I get to, let me go into the details at this point. So just backing up and going through the special exception, section 54-220 of the zoning ordinance, there are items A through M, and those are the items that the board must find that the application satisfies those in order to grant the approval. A is the net loss, deals with the net loss of dwellings. Well, there are no dwellings on this property, so that's not an issue. B concerns the loss of office space, and again, they've addressed that. There is no office space and has not been any office space on this property in the last 5 years. C deals with the loss of storefront retail space. They're actually retaining 100% of their storefront retail space in this building along King Street. D concerns whether there's going to be a significant increase in automobile traffic on streets within residential districts. The two neighborhoods that are closest to this property are Radcliffe Borough and Mazik Rag Borough. And in the image overview and in the information that you received is a letter from Mazik Rag Borough indicating that they are opposed to this application. But I just want to point out that the closest residentially zoned property in that neighborhood is 25 John Street, and that is 677 feet away from the part of this property, 438 King Street, that extends out to John Street. So a good distance away, and I'll come back to their letter. The location, the accommodations use is E. E deals with the location, the accommodations use contributing to the maintenance recreation of a diverse mixed-use district. We feel that this accomplishes that. F deals with the total square footage of restaurant and bar space in the facility, and they have identified that space. It would be within the ground floor of the building, not on the rooftop. There was mention in one of the letters of opposition about a rooftop bar, but that is not the case. There is no rooftop bar as part of this application, and there's no space that would accommodate that type of use. So they've addressed that restriction and are below that 12% threshold. And this is a 36-room hotel, so it's not a very large building, so the bar restaurant space in this building will be in keeping with the other establishments on King Street. E concerns, I read that already, sorry. F deals, F, I covered that. That's the 12% bar restaurant space. G concerns the guest drop-off area. And you'll hear more discussion about this, but I think they've addressed that issue. And one of the things that this ordinance identifies, is getting the city's Department of Traffic and Transportation to review the proposed guest drop-off area and determine whether they think that's sufficient or appropriate and safe, and that it would not be an impediment to traffic. And they have made that determination and found that their proposal meets those requirements. So H concerns the total number of sleeping units in the facility being at least 10 sleeping units. In this case, we have a 36 room accommodations use, so they might meet that requirement. I concerns the number of units not exceeding the allowed number by zoning, and they're under the 50 room limit in this area of the city, unless you're a full service hotel, which they are not, so they're under that, they meet that requirement. J is whether the facility will share any of its buildings, structures, facilities with other accommodations uses, and that's not the case. There are no other accommodations uses in the immediate area of this one. K is whether the accommodations use incorporates meeting space sufficient to meet the requirements in the ordinance, and they do satisfy. In fact, they exceed by quite a bit that minimum requirement in their proposal. And then L is whether the proposal would exceed the 8 full-service hotels that are allowed on the peninsula. This is not a full-service hotel, so that's not an issue. And finally, M is deals with the payment of a fee for affordable housing based on the size of the facility, and they will satisfy that. They indicate they will satisfy that requirement. So they've met the requirements that are identified in the ordinance for an approval of a special exception for an accommodations use. And then the section goes on and identifies another 20 items of information that have to be provided with the application. And I'm not going to go through each one of those, but they have provided all of that information with their application, including a memo from their traffic consultant, Jennifer Veal, who addresses the traffic issues and the trip counts and the guest drop-off parking. And we've also included the email from James Wallace of the city's Department of Transportation about his findings with regard to the requirements of this section. And so in short, I think they've met all the requirements of the special exception test. And let me just talk a little bit more specifically about this access easement. So here in this map, I've just illustrated that I don't think this is an over-concentration of hotel uses or accommodations uses in this immediate area. You've got the block that this property falls within, which does not have any accommodations uses, and there are none proposed. In the block to the north, that includes the visitor center, parking garage, office building, and smaller buildings along King Street, there are no accommodations uses existing or proposed. So it's not until you get almost 780 feet north of this site before you get to the next accommodations use moving north. And then up to the south, you do have 3 hotels, and you see the distances there. It's 482 feet from the front door of this property on King Street down to the Bennett Hotel. And then you've got the Embassy Suites next door and the Hampton Inn on that block as well. But I don't think this is an over-concentration of accommodations uses. This is a 36-room hotel, so a very small accommodations use. And moving on, the easement issue. So I go to this plan right here. John Street is on the bottom of this site plan, and King Street is on the left side of the site plan. So the historic building sits here, and then the addition to the historic building would be back here in this area. And what they've indicated here is a driveway off of John Street, and then an easement, and there is a 22-foot wide easement centered on this dashed line right here that I'm moving my cursor over. And that 22-foot wide easement provides access to this property as well as the city's properties, where the Children's Museum is located, and the Patrick's properties to the north. And it was established in about 2001, I believe is the approximate date. And so the city, the Patricks, this property owner, and they're all party to the easement, and they all have to abide by the restrictions. Now, there are some encroachments that have occurred over time. Some people are parking in the easement, and if the parties determine that needs to be remedied, they can do that. But we feel that the easement is in place and functioning, and don't see an issue with the operation of that easement today. Now, there's also this easement right here, which is hard to see, but it shapes the back of this building on this site plan. So this is the ground floor of the addition to the historic building for this hotel. And you can see it has that rear wall that's sort of drawn at a diagonal. It's not square to the front of the property. And that's to accommodate this easement. Well, turns out that that easement does not exist anymore. We've determined that that easement was basically eliminated because of the changing property ownership and configuration of these properties. So that easement is no longer in existence. They can actually expand this area of the ground floor further back to the rear property line, which is right here, and should they choose to do so. But we feel like this plan for the parking is sufficient and will work. And of course, they'll have to design it and spec it out as they go through the approval process within the city before they actually get their permits to build it. And so the details will have to be figured out, fleshed out at that point. But we feel like they've got a proposal here that would work, could work, assuming they put all those details together. So I think they've met the parking requirement, and like I said, they've satisfied all the other issues that are identified in the special exception test. And what happens above this ground level is just something I want to point out. So you can't really tell from these site plans, but this ground level down here is a little bit short. The depth of that rear addition is shorter than on the upper floors because these upper floors were designed to cantilever over that 10-foot easement. Well, that easement no longer exists, so that's not an issue. They can continue to have these larger floor plates above. There is one issue, though, that I did identify in going through this, and I'll mention that now. Here. Well, I'll just point it out right here because what you see on these upper floors, like this floor right here, this is the second floor, the event space. And you see that it comes out to the rear property line here. If I go back to this one, see where so that the second floor is coming all the way out there. And what we've determined is that rear corner of the building, which I thought I had marked, but apparently it doesn't show up on this, but the rear corner of the building, which is right here, I'm moving my cursor over that triangular portion of that floor that equates to approximately 82 square feet. That portion of the building actually encroaches into the other 22-foot wide access easement that the city is a party to. And according to the terms of that easement, I don't think they can encroach into that easement with this building. So I think they'd have to remove that one little corner of the building on this floor and all the floors above. But if you see, so here we have an event space, and losing that little corner right there doesn't impact the property. On the upper floors, there's this terraced area right here. Again, if they had to shorten those terraces, that wouldn't create any problems. Here's another terrace right here. So you see they're not losing any conditioned space on these upper floors except in the event space area. And so that encroachment can be remedied without really jeopardizing or impacting the viability of the hotel. For zoning purposes, they still meet all the requirements. And so I think they've addressed all the issues These are elevations, they've lowered the height, and of course, they'll have to go through the VAR process. As this moves forward, this is the memorandum from Jennifer Beal speaking on traffic issues. This is the information about their parking lift system that they would install and the clearances that are necessary. And this is the email from James Wallace of the Department of Traffic and Transportation. So and this is the easement document. So this is from 2000 actually, when it was signed by these different property owners to establish that 22-foot wide easement. So my recommendation is going to be for approval, and I see the folks from BZA-Z here, so I know that they submitted a letter, and I think you all received that letter. Read that, I suppose, and then we also have a letter from the Preservation Society, which I don't know if I see anybody here from the Preservation Society, but they have indicated in their letter that they are opposed. It says, did all of you receive this letter?
We did, that was in the package.
If you haven't seen it, I can read it.
If you would read it, I would
Okay.
appreciate it.
So the Preservation Society stands with the BZA-Z Neighborhood Association in opposition to this request. While we appreciate the applicant heeding the board's direction and meeting with residents since the last meeting, we find the Neighborhood Association's assessment of potential traffic and congestion impacts compelling and want to ensure residents' voices are heard. According to section 54.220 of the ordinance that establishes the accommodations overlay zone, potential negative impacts to accommodations uses affecting residential districts shall be avoided or minimized to the greatest extent possible. And outside residential districts, accommodations uses shall contribute to the preservation and creation of diverse mixed-use districts. We urge the board to seriously weigh concerns laid out by the BZA-Z residents, particularly as it relates to traffic, parking, and congestion. Further, in keeping with our previous comments, we disagree that this use will contribute to diverse mixed-use district. As pointed out at the previous meeting, there are several other similar uses within a 500-foot radius and an oversaturation of accommodations in the broader Upper King Street area at a time when downtown Charleston faces significant housing shortage and the loss of neighborhood serving businesses. This site presents a critical opportunity to reintroduce uses that serve and strengthen the Charleston community. The city's authority and responsibility to encourage diverse neighborhood serving uses rests solely with the Board of Zoning Appeals. The clear standard established by the accommodations test must be met. We do not feel this request rises to that standard. We ask the board to deny this request. Sincerely, Aaron Minnick, Director of Preservation and Planning.
Thank you, Mr. Batchelder. By show of hands, if you're here in opposition to this application, can you just, great, I just wanted to confirm. At this point, we'll hear from the applicant. State your name and address for the record.
Thank you. Bill Stevenson, representing the Basic Kitchen Group. That's a local restaurant group. They have a model of having a restaurant with hotel accommodations use above, which has been very successful in Tennessee and Savannah and in Mount Pleasant. This is probably one of the larger ones as far as the number of rooms. It's 36 rooms, which I think could be argued that is, I think it's a very 36-room boutique hotel is, I think, a very good use for on King Street. A lot of people have I think, a knee-jerk reaction against hotels in Charleston. being an architect who designs hotels and restaurants, I'm kind of pro hotel, but I know that, I live here too, so I have some concern when I see all these hotels being built, but really, the reality is that there's still not enough hotels. I mean, I have friends come in this weekend and they couldn't find a hotel room, so it's a crash at my house. So just studying this part of King Street, we really think that this is a very good use. I think it's a local group and they do a really nice job, and I think that a small hotel, I think is perfect. This is the perfect location for it. Not to mention I know that the neighborhood is very concerned about over intensification of use. And I would say that this area is where this use is supposed to take place in Charleston. It's designed to have the height and the density to accommodate this type of use. So I can definitely empathize with neighbors being concerned, but on the other hand, I think that really this is the area, and after going through this entire process and finding that we do meet all of the requirements and standards, which are very stringent. So in doing that, I think that it kind of just shows this is an appropriate use for the area. I think Lee did a very good job of going through all of the requirements. I don't know if you all have any further questions about that, but I know we also have quite a bit of presentation work and work to do for the BAR. And a lot of the questions that I think are concerning the neighborhood will be addressed at that point. We want this to be as successful as possible. We'd like the neighborhood to be happy with it. So we're going to work very hard to try to make that happen. But just any hotel is going to be something they don't want to see, and I understand that. But once again, I think that this is the appropriate place for it. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson.
Thank you.
At this point, are there any other speakers on behalf of the applicant? On to hear the opposition at this point.
So I'm Margaret O'Brien, and I live at 36 Chapel Street, which is basically 2 blocks away, short blocks. It is very difficult to drive through this block of John Street at any time of day now. Adding the additional traffic will make it completely congested. So in addition to the traffic that comes in and out of the hotel parking lot, it's really the major route that a lot of people use to go to the west, because they come through Chapel Street. Even with Angie's speed humps, they come through Chapel Street. Even with a sign that prohibits trucks, we do still get trucks. But for the people who live in the neighborhood, getting in and out of the neighborhood to the south, to the west, or the south for that matter, is very difficult and will be made infinitely worse by adding a hotel there, where the only access to the hotel really for the vehicles is through a place that is already congested getting in and out for the people that park there and pay for parking.
My name is Sue Flaster. I live at 42 Chapel Street, which is again about 1.5 blocks, 2 blocks from this proposal. My question kind of regards what the mission of this organization is. Part of it seems to be, as you said earlier, to maintain maintain the character of neighborhoods. There have been other proposals for hotels in this same space and using some of the same buildings, but it seems to me that the height of this proposed structure, it's going to stick out over the 1, 2, and relatively small. three-story buildings around it, and will change considerably the sort of, I hate to say skyline, but certainly the vision of that block.
Well, I'm Ferris Kaplan. I'm president of the BZA-Z Rural Neighborhood Association. Lee, can you act that letter?
Your letter?
Yes.
Yeah.
Does everybody have a copy of that? It's in the photographs attached. There we go. Actually, they probably have a letter. Can you go to the photographs, Lee?
Sure.
There we go. In case you're not familiar with it, and what's not been brought up very often, yes, it's 36 rooms, plus restaurants, plus retail, but it's also 8 stories on a block of 2- and 3-story buildings. So please take that into consideration. We don't understand why it needs to be 8 stories in the middle of a 2- and 3-story block. So our closest residence may be 600 or more feet away, but the consequences of the hotel greatly affects our residents. And meeting the requirements doesn't necessarily make it a good idea. And it's not a knee-jerk reaction, that's just the reality of living with another hotel so nearby because of the spillage into our residential historic neighborhood. Traffic is one of the biggest problems. As Margaret mentioned, John Street, people coming and going from Chapel, coming from East Bay, or coming from King Street to go into John, which becomes Chapel, will make it more of a mess than it is now. It's well traveled, it's overly congested as it is. It has shuttle bus stops, the visitor center, the bus barn, the Charleston Music Hall, the Children's Museum, which now on Ann Street has bodega and helping, showing hand, what's the other restaurant? One of the other restaurants, but it takes up the entire alley. So there's a lot of congestion going on there. We see that as a problem. The guest drop-off is a problem. It's difficult to see how using this area as a loading zone would comply with the easement. The rooftop bar, this is the first we've heard that there is no rooftop bar. I don't know, Neil, no rooftop bar?
No, there never was.
Okay. Well, the original, we thought that the penthouse included rooftop bar. Roof deck experience. Okay, so it's a terrace. What is the plan, Neil?
There's a penthouse on the roof private to the guest,
Okay,
or a guest, to whoever's renting.
okay. So people off the street or guests can't go up. It's not a party patio.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Parking, the parking plan in the application includes parking for 12 accommodation staff, but provides no estimate for retail, restaurant, or event staff. And so for these reasons, the parking, the traffic, and the congestion, as well as the expanded event space, which is going to draw more density, that's why we, along with the Preservation Society, oppose granting a special exception for this 36-room, 8-story hotel on King Street at 438. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Kaplan.
April Wood, Historic Charleston Foundation. Historic Charleston Foundation has reviewed the application for a special exception to allow 36-unit accommodations use at 438 King Street. We are opposed to this application to allow a hotel at this location. We remain very concerned over the overproliferation of accommodation uses across the peninsula. We strongly believe that the overwhelming presence of multiple large hotels in the immediate vicinity of the site, both extant and planned, creates yet another threat of a monoculture of use and developing in this important part of our city. Ordinance section 54-220B1E charges this board with determining whether the location of the accommodations used will contribute to the maintenance or creation of a diverse mixed-use district. Approval of a special exception will allow accommodation use at this location is contrary to the maintenance of a diverse mixed-use district in this area of the peninsula. We fear that this area is quickly becoming a tourism-centric district with such a high concentration of accommodations. There should be more focus on developing resources for residents. Currently, there are 11 hotels within a 4-block radius and 5 more already having been approved. With an excess of 2,500 rooms existing or planned in the immediate vicinity, the special exception request for 438 King Street would add additional rooms to a small geographic area that is nearly overwhelmed by accommodation uses. Respectfully, HCF asks the board to deny the application for 438 King.
Thank you, Ms. Wood. Anyone else in opposition? Or to back up the applicant to rebut?
I just wanted to set the record straight that this is not an 8-story. We're trying to keep it to 6-story. The reality is that this group is a restaurant-oriented group, and they wanted a certain square footage, and the zoning ordinance requires that you can't have more than 12% of the accommodations, heated and cooled accommodations used to be used for the hotel, for the restaurant use. So we're trying to seek that balance of condensing the restaurant and trying to condense the hotel. Right now it's 6 stories with a penthouse, which is pulled in. I know in elevation it looks larger, but if we, as we work through this, we're going to try to keep it to reduce that, understanding that it is taller than buildings around it, but it is in the center of the block, and it's as I stated before, the intention of this area and the Height District is to accommodate this size building so that you can get your density into the center of the block, and then it would step down to the edges, and that's what we were trying to do. The top floor is not an event space for the public. It is just for a guest renting it with a terrace around it. And that was just a way to kind of try to step that in, step the building in so that it's not as massive. And again, I have to say that the location of this is where the city has, where I think is like the best place to put a use like this, because it's really what the zoning has been designed for, and that's why it's being done here and not in other places in the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. We'll now close the public portion of the meeting and open it up to the board with any questions or discussion.
So will the the height, it will be addressed at other levels of approvals?
Yeah, the project will have to go through the Board of Architectural Review and get their approval. It is the property sits within a different height district along the front versus the rear. So the front is lower, the back portion of the property is within an 8-story district. 8 stories is what City Council approved back in 2017. I wasn't a fan of that, but I was not the person making the proposal out of the department. So I lost that one, but so it's an 8-story district. The other buildings around, or other properties around this one, probably don't have the same development potential as this one, except maybe the one right on John Street, because they're mostly developed with buildings. And then you've got the city properties, so, they are allowed to do this height of the building. 6 stories is better than 7, in my opinion, and hopefully they can stick to that 6-story height limit. But height is not an issue for us tonight, so that they are within that 8-story height limit.
What about the proximity to the hotels to the south?
Well, if I go back to that,
We go back to the point that Ms. Wood brought up about the number of hotels in the vicinity and how another one sort of adds to the mixed use character of the neighborhood.
so city's special exception accommodations overlay zone rather was created in the 80s to try and restrict areas where hotels could be built. And over time, we've amended the rules, I think I counted either 17 or 19 times.
So 2019 was the last one, right?
The last time was 2019. And pretty much every time we've amended those rules, except for a few amendments that were map amendments, but pretty much every time we made the rules more restrictive. And we're to the point now where you can't build an accommodations use in this part of the city unless it's that exceeds 50 rooms. So no accommodations uses with more than 50 rooms in this part of the city, unless they're full service hotels. Now, a full service hotel is a minimum 150 rooms and lots of convention space or meeting space and full service restaurants. But we've met the cap on the total number of full service hotels that can be built on the peninsula at the present time. So there won't be any more of those up here. So what you have today, except for maybe a few 50-room hotel proposals here and there, is what is going to be in place near future and for some time, unless City Council decides to change the rules. There are opportunities probably on other sites where you could build 50-room hotels, but we've made it much more difficult. You can't just go in and displace housing. We didn't have that rule until more recently. And the hotels to the south, the Bennett Hotel, the Embassy Suites, the Hampton Inn, and the Francis Marion Hotel, those predate these very strict rules. The Bennett Hotel was built after the accommodations rules were in effect. The Hampton Inn was built then, but we didn't have those restrictions on the number of rooms. And so I really think that we've tightened the rules down to the point where they're effectively really stopping the large hotels from being built. We do have some that are vested, can be built in the near future, and they will be built eventually. But we're not going to get new proposals, I don't think, for those, because we've capped out the number that we can have. So we're stuck with 50-room hotels in this part of the city. I think that's a nice size for this city. Honestly, we've had a lot of 50-room hotels, 50-room and smaller hotels built over the years. And I think they work really well with the commercial fabric of the areas that they occupy. We've got just an example. You go down King Street, King's Courtyard Inn. That's been there for a number of years. That's a beautiful little facility on King Street. It blends in with King Street wonderfully. I think this one would be along those same lines. It's going to have this taller building in the back, but the BAR will be able to address the design of that building, and it sits well back from the street. So I think this will be a nice addition to this block of King Street. Honestly, I see all kinds of other proposals coming before me to try and get approval on King Street, and a lot of them aren't so good.
Mr. Bennett?
So I do feel like they have met the requirements. So
Sorry, Mr. Capel, unless there's a question, the public portion is closed at this time. Unless someone has a question for Mr. Capel, would like to hear this question. I am curious to hear your response, Mr. Capel.
This is only opportunity for a usage issue. So the question is, if you are even considering this, is there a way that you can require that that rooftop is a private residential floor, not be opened up for parties, for events, and venues that, we've gone through this 11 years now with the Dewberry. We don't want to start over now with the hotel.
Certainly, yeah, conditions are an opportunity for this board to provide requirements and restrictions as the board sees fit to restrict. Yeah. Mr. Batchelder, one of the things you brought up that I thought was interesting was talking about sort of the scale of hotels. It seemed as if City Council was kind of directed towards two different scales. You have the full service, larger 150 plus room hotels, and the smaller ones at the 150, and different requirements for each, it sounds like. And I guess this is perhaps maybe more on tune of what the city had envisioned for these smaller scale projects, which is, I think, an interesting point. I do have a couple thoughts about percentage requirement. There's a 12% restaurant requirement that must be sort of the max square footage use. And I'm wondering how that plays into the comment Mr. Stevenson said about how if they're trying to meet a restaurant of a certain size, they have to offset that with additional hotel rooms in order to keep themselves under that 12% limit. And I'm just wondering if you could comment on where perhaps that number came from and how that is intended to play into the diversity of use within the property.
So back in 2010, we had a number of proposals to build new accommodations uses with large bars or restaurants. And we were concerned about people wanting to build these small hotels just to get a rooftop bar. And the probably what really prompted us to look at that issue was the Bohemian Hotel, 50-room hotel, and the entire top floor, the roof level, and the inside area is a restaurant bar. And we were concerned that if we didn't do something, we were going to end up with those kind of things all over. And that approval process generated some opposition from the Ansonboro Neighborhood Association. And ultimately, we came up with a series of conditions that were applied to that particular hotel to address those concerns. But that issue was one that we didn't see going away based on the conversations we were having with hotel developers. So we looked at the existing hotels and smaller hotels especially, and how much bar restaurant space they had relative to the overall size of the building. And it just seemed like 12% seemed to be an appropriate percentage. And so I'd say probably about, 2012 or so, we adopted that restriction. And it's been on the books for 10 years or so. And it's worked well, I think, with the approvals that we have had. Hasn't been an issue. But the flip side of that is it might drive somebody to have a larger hotel than they might otherwise have, just so they can accommodate their restaurant bar space. And that hasn't happened until this project potentially. And I don't know if they could cut off that penthouse room and lower the square footage and what that would do, but to their overall limit on their restaurant bar space. But they're 36 rooms, 35 rooms. I don't think that's not going to be noticeable for our purposes tonight. But that's where that 12% restriction came from.
Thank you.
I feel like the city's made a good case in regards to, the application meeting the requirements of the ordinance. However, I believe that the residents who live there have also made a good case in, expressing their concerns about traffic congestion and things that would make their neighborhood less livable. And then the preservation organizations have made a good case that this project might not necessarily contribute to the creation of a diverse use district, and that it might create an over-proliferation of accommodation uses. So I think it's a tough one. I think that if we could perhaps just look at it more holistically, in the greater picture of maybe not just this one little small, project or this block, or maybe look at it more comprehensively, might help.
Ms. Batchelder, can you flip back to the satellite view that you showed us sort of the surrounding properties? You mentioned something about developability, and I was just really curious what sort of opportunities are still lying within that block, just in terms of open spaces. It seems like a tall mass at the rear of this property would tend to stick out on this block. The other thought too I have is about the access at the rooftop. What would be, certainly if it's restricted to guest use only, that would be an important step. My other question would be about hours of access, if there would be any restrictions or expectation of restrictions comparable to a typical rooftop access. And what would be, if, for example, it had been a restaurant that was requested on the top floor, regardless of whether it's this application or another one, what would be the typical hours of operation and limits for when the rooftop space would be open?
I don't know that we've ever restricted the hours for these kinds of rooftop. Oh, that's correct. The Dewberry, we did do that with the Dewberry, but that was maybe not, I can't remember how we came up with that time limitation. But anyway, on the other ones, no, we haven't done that. We've restricted the noise.
Mm-hmm.
Come up with restrictions for noise, but not hours of operation, I don't believe. And I don't know that it's typical that they would operate late anyway, but I think you really ought to just apply a condition to the approval, if you are inclined to approve it, that would prohibit that use from ever being on that, the rooftop of the penthouse level of the building.
That's 8.2.4. Can you pull that sheet up?
So just to walk you through, these are floors, and purple indicates all the guest rooms. And so you see the third floor here, filled with guest rooms, fourth and fifth floor right here, sixth floor, and then the seventh floor is this penthouse room. Guest room. Is that the sheet you wanted?
Let's go, if you don't mind, to A2.4. That kind of lays that penthouse out with the porches on both sides. Of course, it hasn't been defined, so we can't actually see all the access points in and out. But if we
Back
restrict,
up to the paper.
I'm sorry, access points in and out of the unit.
Right.
I was gonna say flipping from the penthouse to the first floor. I mean, I agree with Ally that I think the city puts out a great case. I think it would be a great little hotel. But again, as the historic organization said, is it really contributing to a mixed use in the neighborhood and the diversity? And I look at the first floor, which was a beautiful retail space at some point. I think it was Mitchell Hill Gallery or something. Anyway, it's got a beautiful storefront, beautiful space, and it seems to me, if I recall, that the only retail space that was left was gonna be about 600 square feet out of about 2,000 or so that was maybe there. So I didn't know if that was of a concern to anybody else, it was just something that I noticed. It's really-
I think I might be more
Application.
concerned if it were entirely retail or entirely restaurant. I think the benefit of having multiple uses is part of the effort of trying to create diversity. But,
And so
It's-
keeping
it's
the retail
significantly
storefront, the storefront remains storefront. And then the entrance to the restaurant is down the side, and also from the rear,
it does appear there's an entrance off the lobby from the hotel.
so it's off, okay.
Mhm.
You have to go through the restaurant.
I would like to know a little bit, and maybe it's obviously a little early in the planning stages, but how the service access works with the kitchen being on the opposite side of all the parking. What's sort of the expectation for waste removal and just truck service delivery entrances coming? Would that all be coming through the John Street entrance, I guess, off of that access road? And would that take place to the north side of the building? I'm not sure I'd have to go back. Can you get a site plan, Lee?
A1, there you go.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Stevenson, could you comment briefly on that? Is it intended that the service access would be on the north side of the kitchen, coming around behind 442 King Street?
Yes, the intention is for deliveries to happen from John Street, but also there's a loading zone on King Street that everybody kind of uses. So there's multiple points. The garbage is kept on site in its own room. And King Street has a garbage pickup every day for restaurants. So we haven't talked about whether it would be private garbage pickup, but that's an option as well.
Okay, thank you.
Did you put up the location of the hotel versus the neighborhood again?
Zoning map,
So where
you're
does,
looking for this?
yeah, I see the commercial area, and so the neighborhood is, on what would be the north side or the east side of Meeting Street, is that right?
Well, Mazik Road has their boundary down the middle of King Street. So they come over from the east all the way to King Street. And then, of course, the red areas are commercial zone. And then once you get to the east side of Meeting Street, you begin to move into the residentially zoned portion of the neighborhood is shown here.
You said we did or did not hear from Radcliffe Borough?
We never heard anything from Radcliffe Borough. They never expressed any comments on this.
They're on the opposite side of King Street.
Right, they're, of course, to the west of King Street.
And VAR will deal with height scale and maps.
Not any way that they can have the amount of rooms if they don't go up the amount of floors, I imagine.
Um,
Right?
Could we pull up the percentages one more time? It looked like there was still a good bit of room. I knew that we were right up against that 12% mark, and I was curious about that.
Oh, you want
Maybe I
that?
just read the numbers small.
To read that.
Or if you've got it available.
So, in their response to that item F, under section 54-220, they say that the total square footage of interior and exterior floor area for restaurant bar space and the proposed accommodations use, including the restaurant bar patron use areas, bar areas, kitchen, storage, and bathroom facilities is less than 12% of 35,572 square feet of total interior conditioned floor area in the accommodations use, which allows for 3,908 square feet of floor area. And on their plans, I do have the calculations here. So they are, according to these plans, this is the sheet A12, going to have 2,696 square feet of restaurant area. And it's all interior space.
And what is the total accommodations use area? Sorry.
The allowed 12% number.
Well, no, I'm sorry, the proposed accommodations number.
The total square footage?
Yes.
So they indicate this.
Seem like they're under 10%. 32,572.
32,572 square feet like this. But then on this set of plans, it says total interior hotel event restaurant area is 4,000.
That allows for 3,900 square feet.
Yeah,
So they're
40,410 square feet is the total interior hotel event restaurant area. Sorry.
I guess maybe Jeff could answer your question. It seems like that could be, they're not pressed up against that 12% number. Should that be an opportunity if still work around that, even if there were a loss of square footage on the hotel?
I think it sounds that way. I like the idea a little bit about limiting access to those deck floors on that penthouse to tenant, or what we call it, the guest and their guest on that floor. I'm comfortable with that, knowing that we could restrict the noise and problems that could be associated.
That's the same music going on. I said, shoot, we're eliminating those with.
There's a lot of noise already in the neighborhood. Yeah, you're right about that.
And if I pay for a penthouse, I might wanna
Have
go out on the terrace.
I think that's good. I think having your friends and your guests out there. But it doesn't seem like it could be public, it doesn't appear to be large enough to make public spaces.
I mean, the city's presentation makes the point that they do meet all the requirements of the ordinance. However, we still, in my mind, it's still questionable D&E, in terms of increasing traffic along the residential streets in the residential district. I know it's within a commercial district, but it's still, the cars will, as the residents made a point, impact their streets or the traffic impact them. And then E, that one's still questionable to me because, the hotel or the accommodations use doesn't contribute to diverse mixed use district. The retail and the restaurant do. but the accommodations use doesn't. Because there are other accommodations uses so close by. I mean, just, that's my opinion. I don't know, I'm struggling with it, honestly, so.
I'm concerned with so typically someone comes to a hotel, they're brought to the hotel by some sort of transportation. Whereas if it was another use, maybe it would be more intrusive. If it was hotel people drive there, they've got to find parking spaces. Hotel uses sometimes become less intrusive because they're brought to the location. Not as many cars, just a thought. It's so concentrated with so much stuff that 36 unit doesn't feel like a whole lot. Particularly being having drop off points.
I guess if it was office, then they would be coming in, parking cars there and coming and going during the day in office use. That might even create more trips, more transportation.
During rush hour. Their motion.
I'll make a motion to approve.
With or without conditions.
So we're with condition of no rooftop bar. Obviously, I'm not too concerned about a guest on the terrace. I would want to discuss that portion.
I'd be comfortable seconding that, you know, and what we're saying, I think, is that if a penthouse is approved, that the decks for the penthouse be exclusively used by the hotel guest and their guest for that room, that there not be public access for other users.
I'm going to restate the motion just for the record, and I have some discussion on it. Mr. Goodwin has proposed a motion for approval with condition to restrict the rooftop bar to guest use only, if I understand that correctly. And Mr. McKay has seconded the motion. At this point, we'll open it up for discussion amongst ourselves.
I don't think it's a rooftop bar. I don't think,
Excuse me.
no, it's not a rooftop bar. I think you're just saying not to have a rooftop bar up there, but right now, it's a guest room. And so I think what we're saying
With
is,
rooftop access.
yeah, no rooftop bars, but they're not asking for that, but I think that's might be well stated. But then the second request is that the porches off of, if a penthouse is approved, the porches off the penthouse be for the exclusive use of the guest.
That rent the penthouse.
That I'm good with that.
Okay. Would you like to? Ms. Ashby, do you have that condition noted, or would you like it restated?
Please restate.
Mr. McKay, would you restate the
All right.
condition?
So the one, so we're moving for approval. The first condition is there not be a rooftop bar on the premises. If a penthouse is approved, that penthouse's porches be for the exclusive use of the guest of the penthouse.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Discussion on the motion. All those in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. All those opposed?
This is so tough. I did not say aye. Can I talk a little bit more?
Of
Is
course.
that okay? Because I appreciate what my colleagues up here have said. I mean, regarding the office uses, parking. I don't know, it's just really tough because I mean, it does seem like it could create a burden for the neighborhood, but I don't know that because we have traffic studies showing that, you know, it probably won't. So, I don't know. Do you need to call it?
Yes.
Sorry.
Let's Let's not go by group, we'll go individually. Mr. Goodwin, do you vote in favor or against the motion? In favor. Mr. McKay?
Aye.
Okay. Ms. Richards?
I'm with Ally, it's just such a difficult one.
In favor of the motion. Ms. Brass?
I'll go aye and just hope that BAR resolves a lot of the issues that we talked about too.
I will vote in favor as well. The motion is unanimously approved with conditions. 5-0. Following agenda item A3, 411 Meeting Street will be chaired by Ms. Brass.
Sorry, just requested to be deferred. And so unless the board objects to that,
Does the board object to deferral to 411 Meeting Street? No. Item A3, 411 Meeting Street will be heard at the next meeting that they present. Very good, thank you. Next item on the agenda is B1, 82.5 Cannon Street, Cannonboro, Elliottboro, TMS number 4600803-025. Request variance from section 54-301 to allow construction of a detached two-story accessory building guest house with a 3.9-foot west side setback, 9 feet required, zone LB, limited business. Mr. Batchelor.
this is a property, commercially zoned property in Cannonboro, Elliottboro. And you see on this map that the subject property is pretty narrow. It's actually 23.5 feet wide. And the lot next door to the east is also a very narrow lot. Otherwise, most of the lots are considerably wider than this one. Here's the zoning map showing that commercial zoning aerial view. Lots extend well back into the block, and typically the buildings are up front, but you do see some accessory buildings in the back. And that is what is proposed tonight, is an accessory building that would sit at the back of the property, well back from Canton. So again, another view of the property, the house, the historic home sits up front. They're proposing a building back where that asterisk is located on this map. And this is the view from the north looking south. Another view. These are examples of other buildings. They're proposing a hip roof. So this is the guest house that is proposed with that 3-foot, 11-inch side setback, which is 3.9 feet on the west side. The east side can have a 3-foot setback. So it's just the west side we're talking about here, and more views. This is a 2-story building that's proposed. Let's see here. View, more views, more information. So I'll just run through these, and if you have questions, the applicant is here. He can help. But get to the end where we have the letters. So 82.5 Cannon Street is the subject property. To the west, you have 84 Cannon Street. That's owned by the applicant for this application. So the property owner on the west side of the property, the most impacted property, is obviously in support. He's making this request. The neighboring property owner on the east side is 82 Cannon Street. That property is owned by Alex Ramsey, and he has written a letter indicating that he supports the variance request. And then the Cannonboro-Elliott Borough Neighborhood Association has indicated in their letter shown here that they support the request as well. So I think, obviously the very narrow width of this lot contributes to the need for a variance. And so for that reason, I recommend approval of this request and the fact that they meet the variance test.
The city recommends approval. Is there anyone in opposition to this applicant? Is the applicant present? Do you wish to add anything to Mr. Batchelder's presentation?
My name is Stephen Ramos. I'm the applicant, and I think Lee covered it really well. We've gotten support from the neighborhood and the neighbors. And as you mentioned, the setback that we're referring to is on the west side, and in this condition, it's the same owner. So the person that would be impacted by the lesser setback is the owner. So, and these types of developments are typical in the neighborhood, these little back buildings. So we feel like it meets the test, and it certainly isn't of any detriment to the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ramos. Any questions to the board? Is there a motion?
Move for approval.
Mr. McKay moves for approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Richards seconds the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? None. Motion is unanimously approved.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is item B2, 443 UG Street, Hampton Park Terrace. Request special exception under section 54-110 to allow a second-story addition, stair, bath, playroom to a non-conforming building footprint having a 0-foot rear setback, 0-foot side setback, west side setback, 25 feet and 9 feet required, zoned DR1F. Mr. Batchelder.
So this is an existing building on this residential lot in Hampton Park Terrace. And building, it's just a one-story accessory building. It has a 0-foot rear setback and 0-foot west side setback. And what they want to do is make this one-story building essentially 1.5 stories. We say a second story because it's a second floor. But you see the building in the back corner of this lot right here on this map. Can't see it very well, but it's back here in this area of the lot. And there's an image of the existing building. Another image right there. And they would like to do is do this. So it adds this roof, this interesting roof with this second floor within the building. And that addition of that additional height, that additional floor is what triggers the need for the special exception. The applicant has spoken with the neighbors, and we have here at the end of this presentation these text messages from 447 Hugie Street. The owners of 447 indicate they support this project, and the owners of 368 Ashley Avenue supports this project as well. So the two most impacted neighboring property owners are fine with this, and this is a special exception, so it's a question of whether the light and the air on these adjoining properties would be impacted, and these people don't seem to think that would be an issue. So for those reasons, we recommend approval of this request.
The city recommends approval. Is there anyone present in opposition? Is the applicant present? Do you wish to speak on behalf of this application?
No, I don't think I have anything to add to that.
Thank you. You're Mr. Smythe? Or
Smith, yes, sir.
Smith, thank you.
Thank you.
This is the application that city staff recommended that the tree not be removed. Is this the same?
I don't recall,
Is this the,
I'm not sure.
is this the same application the city staff recommended the tree not be removed or it not be?
Yes, and we have not asked for the tree
Okay, I was just
to
remembering.
be removed.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
I thought that was part of the variance, or not variance, special exception. Okay, got it.
Any other questions?
Move for approval.
Motion for approval by Ms. Grass, second by Ms. Richards. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? None. The motion is unanimously approved.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is item B3, 1761 Old Military Road, TMS number 431-00-00-283. Request variance after the fact from section 54-301 to allow a detached accessory building, carport, with a 1-foot south side setback, 9-foot required, zoned SR-1. Mr. Batchelor.
This is a residential property, and the applicant is requesting approval for a 1-foot south side setback for this accessory building, little carport that was added to the property. And you see the location of the property here and the house. There's a driveway down one side, and here's a photograph. So this shows the neighbor's accessory building, which is kind of over on their side of the property, abutting this, and this is the carport, boat board addition that was added. And so it's a building technically by our definition, so it has to meet building setbacks, and that's the issue. And the location is shown here, so it's back in the backyard area. And the neighbor, most impacted neighbor here at 1765 Old Military Road has indicated that they have no objections, have no concerns with the structure. And so with this kind of a diminutive building setback from the street, we don't object to it, and the neighbor is fine, so we're supportive of the variance request.
The city's recommendation is for approval. Is there anyone in opposition? Anyone on wish to speak on behalf of the application? Does okay. Does the board have any questions? Is there a motion? Motion for approval by Mr. Goodwin. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Richards. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? None. The motion is unanimously approved. Thank you very much. On the agenda tonight is item B4, 79 Hester Street, Wagner Terrace, TMS number 457-11-01-005. Request special exception under section 54-110 to allow a 2-story addition, bathrooms, porches, that extend the non-conforming 5.8-foot west side setback, 0.3-foot east side setback, and a 6.01-foot total side setback. 9 feet, 3 feet, and 15 feet required, zone GB, general business. Mr. Batchelor.
So this
I apologize. Am I reading the correct?
you're reading the correct one. I think this is, for some reason, that's not quite right. It's got the right address and
We
everything,
have
but
the wrong
the
one.
description.
Reading off the slide, not the.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so 79 Hester is an existing single-family residence. It sits on the corner of Hester and Peachtree. And the house faces Hester. So you have the house parallel to the long side of the lot, not the narrow side. And so there's very little backyard for the house. And there's a detached 1-story garage structure that sits on the north side of the house that you'll see in a minute. Both the house and the garage were constructed at the same time in 1955, according to the county's records. And here's an aerial view. and there'll be a front view from the street as well, so you'll see how the character of the two buildings relates to each other. You see the building, the house to the north on Hester Street that is set back, and then one next door on Peachtree that is a two-story building right there behind this house. So applicant filed the application. So what they're doing, so right now there's a main house and a detached one-story garage. And so what they would like to do is connect the garage to the main house. And by doing that, that essentially makes the detached garage not an accessory building, but part of the main footprint of the house. And so that's why we've advertised it as a variance to with these setbacks. I don't have any objections to the concern or to the connection that they're proposing to make. It's so minor. I don't have any issues with that. It's virtually would not change the character if that's all they were doing with this property. So I have no objections to that. Here's another view looking at the house relative to the one-story garage. And some more, this is information that came in with the application initially, and more information. So, and then there are plans that illustrate exactly what they propose to do, but they also want to put dormers in the roof and expand the half story of this building, make it more livable. I don't object to those. This is the area between the garage and the house that they would build that connection in, and this is the area where they put dormers over in the half story of the main house. So, site plan, you can see that the one-story garage sits very close to the side and the north side and the rear property line. And then the area where they would make that connection. Again, that's such a minor change that I don't think it really concerns me at one bit. Floor plans. And so what they're proposing to do by making this connection, though, is alter this building from a garage building into living space on both the first and second floor. So you see the floor plan here extending into what is now that detached garage building. And then you see on these plans the change in the elevation, the front elevation. Dormers have been added to the main house. That's not the issue. The issue is taking this detached garage and making it basically an extension of the main house. And with the way it's designed, it's essentially a two-story building. The ground level would be in line with the ground floor of the house, and then there would be a second floor that would have these dormers, large dormers on the front and back that essentially make it a second story. And side view, you can see here the extent of the dormers on the front and back of this building. And if there was a side view, if the garage was shown on this existing north elevation, it would be quite a bit smaller than what's shown here on this proposed north elevation that shows those changes to that building. So I'm concerned about that, but let me just go through these letters. This is a letter from the neighbors to the west on Peachtree, 122 Peachtree Street, and they indicate they live on this property that butts what they call 76 would be 79 Hester Street, the property we're talking about. And they say they have no objections to them or the concept of connecting the two buildings, we support approved variance requested by council. However, we do reserve the right to express concerns about future design. Drawings for the addition of the second story to the garage. And, this is the place to have those concerns, because if you're inclined to approve it tonight, then I guess the next step would be to go to the BAR. And my understanding from talking to BAR staff is that they would have to go before the board, the BAR small, to get the approval to make these alterations to this home, because it is over 50 years of age. But I'm not clear from talking to the staff person whether the board would really object to these concerns or not. It's not clear to me. And we don't know what the board would do anyway. So really, the time to express concerns about these kinds of issues would be tonight, and I'm not sure this person was here tonight. These folks are here, but they indicate in this letter that they just have some concerns over this second story, and that they look forward to working with the applicant and his building team, including architects, to find mutually agreeable solutions to any of these concerns. So that's that letter. And then what I've done here on this drawing is just illustrate the actual heights of the existing garage and the proposed. Because my concern really is the significant changes to this what is now a one-story detached building, to essentially make it a large addition to the main house that's only that is only 2 feet off the north side property line. So right now, the existing one-story garage has a total height of just over 13 feet to the peak of the roof. And if you measure to the eave, it's 7 feet. So it's a pretty small, diminutive building. And what they're proposing is a total height of 21.5 feet, according to my measurements on this drawing. And that's, again, with those large dormers essentially making it like a 2-story building. And so I am concerned about that. I don't know what the neighbor to the north thinks, and maybe they're here tonight, but I don't know, haven't had any feedback from that neighbor to the north on this proposal. But I would think that this would be a significant change, given the close proximity of this building to their home, to their yard, all that sort of thing. And it seems to also go against the variance test, and it would be a detriment to the neighbors and the character of the district. And that's not necessarily an issue for us, but it is part of the variance test. So I just throw that out there because I'm not supportive of this request. I maybe that would be okay to make this a 1-story addition or true 1.5-story addition to the house, but I don't think that this proposal that you're looking at tonight should be approved. So that's my recommendation.
So the city's recommendation is for denial.
Right.
Is there anyone present in opposition?
The residents of the north.
But if you'd like, if there's no one here in opposition, then just wanted to confirm first. We'd love to hear from you if you'd like to speak on behalf.
Was the applicant here?
I'm sorry, are you?
Yes.
I misunderstood. Are you the
Yeah.
applicant?
No, he's the applicant.
My apologies. Yes, if we could hear from the applicant first. Thank you.
Thank you. Kyle Moriarty.
Thank you.
My wife and I live in what I guess the city would consider affordable housing at the end of Hester. And live there now for a couple of years, and my wife is part of the community garden. And we just kind of, whether it meets the variance test or not, we found it as a unique structure in our neighborhood. And kind of the interest level of being here tonight is the interaction, even though the first letter that came through kind of indicated that there were some additional concerns in meeting with the community and like discussing what the roof pitches would be in the surrounding areas of natural light and livability and outdoor space. It opened my eyes to that when I was standing on the Hester side, the design feature kind of fit, in my opinion, the neighborhood, or like the size home to go from 2,000 square feet to 3, and do something comparable from what we've seen in the area with the dormer design. So the garage profile is something that's still to be determined, but I just kind of was coming to the board on the variance side of if it was something where the connection needed to be 8-10 feet, or it really started to stretch out the structure. When I first approached it, I just felt that with it being such a small, awkward entry point, kind of a water catch, strange roof lines, it spoke to me with having power and plumbing already in the garage with a wood burning fireplace. I just saw that it could enhance the property by making that a kitchen and just incorporating more livable space instead of tearing something down, shifting things over, and complying to what we have for hardships or different things like that.
Thank you, Mr. Moriarty.
Thank you.
Any other people, I guess, in favor? No. We'll hear from the opposition this time. Thank you. You may, yeah. State your name and address if you wish.
Matthew McLaughlin. I live at 81 Hester Street. And I've lived at the house 10 years. My house is about 1,100 square feet right next door. And I was able to speak with Mr. Moriarty yesterday about the application. My main concern is, again, just the proximity to my property. I really have no problem with the idea of connecting the garage to the main house. I think after thinking about it, reflecting on it, my main concern is about having, what essentially would be like a 22-foot wall, solid on that side, on my property side. So again, I think that I'd like for them to use that, but then obviously, and I know that part of the reason that they're wanting to use the garage is because they're trying to preserve the side yard, because there is very limited backyard on this property, and it's already abutting my property on that side. So, from my point of view, I'm just hesitant to see a full 2-story structure go up there at this point. But obviously, if it's designed sensitively, I'm not opposed to something that being, because there's been renters in that house as long as I've lived there, and I'd love to have a single family in that house. It's right in the corner. It's a really prominent property in the neighborhood, so I'd love to see it improved. My concern is just the density, and that we're kind of pushing all that density on the block. Behind me, there was a pretty large screened-in porch that's already kind of encroached on the back. So it's just, I understand the city's growing, so everybody's trying to make use of the property, and that's just my main concern about it at this point. Thanks for your consideration on that.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Moriarty, if you have any rebuttal comments, if you'd like to add. Okay. We'll close the public portion and open up to questions. I do have one for Mr. Batchelder. What is the current, I just want to make sure I understand the setbacks you've got listed out. The carport abutting the neighboring property on Hester Street, is that the 0.3 feet?
See, my agenda has different
Sorry.
numbers.
Mine is,
So you're reading from the slide, but the actual, so the setbacks that exist today are 2 feet along the north side property line and 2 feet on the west, the rear property.
For the sake of the record, I'm going to reread the correct applicant. That is to request a variance from section 54-301 to allow an addition that connects a 1-story garage that increases conditioned space to the main house, having a 2-foot north side setback and a 2-foot rear setback, 9 feet and 25 feet required. Thank you for pointing that out, Mr. Batchelder. So currently, this would be a 7-foot encroachment into the setback on that north side.
That's correct.
Okay. Question for the applicant: is it your intention to retain the carport? I mean, certainly it's not going to be used as a carport, but the structure itself is probably not going to be salvageable for new residential construction, right?
So I have taken it as far as getting to this phase without engaging with an engineer. I had, if that's your question, as far as buildable
Generally,
footprint.
yes.
So Steve, Susan and Steve, on Peachtree were the ones that were kind of bringing into concern of what vertical height and like kind of live loads would be. And I find it interesting that with having the 3-foot vacancy, it's almost like a turned down footer or something there could become the structural wall between the two. So I was seeing that there was kind of an ease of like incorporating it if there was more structural components.
And I guess my question was more along the sides of, salvageability. If the north side setback were reduced to 9 feet to make the light and air impact less detrimental to the neighbor, if that would be a significant impact on, certainly it would be a reduction in square footage. But I wonder if you might comment on just how that might play into the construction.
And I apologize, what side are we talking about now?
North side, this would be adjacent to the Hester Street property, 81.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So 9 foot being from the right hand side.
Correct.
So I don't know if there's a picture we could show of like kind of the front elevation, but the driveway kind of comes up at a kind of the tapers, if you will. And so if that the front of that garage is 19 feet. And so if we were to talk about taking 9 foot out of that, it would probably be right around where the white portion of the garage is, pretty close to it, with that being an 8-foot garage door. So I think that's what we're discussing, is just removing that structure and sliding it over.
I was actually thinking if you're the right side of the property or the right side of the carport essentially shifted 7 feet to hit the 9 foot mark for the property line.
Would the city allow that to be, they wouldn't
Well,
allow it to be
you know,
demolished?
my understanding is that the BAR staff person said that the BAR probably would not allow the building to be demolished. But it wasn't clear to me whether they would allow the changes that are proposed, assuming you could do that without demolishing the existing building. And that seemed to be a little bit odd because he essentially would demolish the building character by changing it. So I would just wonder whether the applicant really probably needs to go back to the drawing board and figure this out. This was kind of a last minute application to us, so we haven't really talked, but it seems like they need to do a little bit more homework on these issues, figure out, talk to the BAR staff, talk to an engineer maybe about what is feasible and what isn't feasible. And because maybe the neighboring property owner to the north would be more agreeable to a smaller type change, not a 2-story change, but something less than that. So, but I think they need to go back to the drawing board, really. I'm just reacting to what they presented, which we have to respond to, and so I think that's not appropriate and should not be approved.
And so our options are to approve, deny,
Or
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 defer.
defer.
Deferral, they can reapply how quickly after that?
Well, it'd be a deferral to ask the applicant to go back and address any specific questions you have, or consider revisions to reduce the overall size of the this proposed addition, and see if they can come to an agreement with the neighbor to the north and the neighbor to the west, really.
is there a motion?
I'll make a motion for deferral, that the applicant goes back to the drawing board and considers some other options, perhaps not quite the magnitude of the development, and works with the north and west side property owners. Would that make sense?
Is there a second?
We want to encourage conversation with BAR staff. Will they meet with them?
Yeah, they can always come down and talk to the BAR staff,
And also add
discuss.
that they just work with city staff, both zoning and BAR. I'll try. Move for deferral and ask the applicant to revisit the plans to look at the mass and the scale of the project and to work with the north side and west side property owners, as well as meeting with city staff of zoning and BER for direction.
Thank you, Ms. Grass. Is there a second?
I'll second.
second.
Oh, both second.
I'll mark you down. Ms. Richards is seconding that motion. All those in favor of deferral with conditions as stated by Ms. Grass, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion is unanimously approved for deferral with comments. Thank you both for sticking with us to the very end of this meeting. It has been a long one, and I appreciate your time. That is the end of the meeting. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
I'm so
that's
sorry.
happened to me, because I think we do the initials, and then I don't do the supporting.
Are we all?
So,